Prepare to send in the next wave, men. There's plenty more where these guys came from. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. We'll be continuing in our Imperial Guard Astra Militarum series today, looking at one of the core units of the force, the Imperial Guard Infantry Squad. In this video we'll take a look at the unit's datasheets, any obvious buffs and synergies that we can do to soup them up to the best of their potential, and how we will send them to die for the Emperor. How we can use them tactically in a game of 40k. In the background, the Astra Militarum are fielded in platoons of infantry squads, drawn from the countless billions of the populous worlds of the Imperium. They maintain the main battle line of the Guard army, doing everything from defending trench lines to charging the enemy position. They are armed with the ubiquitous lasgun, a simple weapon to produce, not the strongest weapon in the Imperium, but a well-disciplined and coordinated volley can take down even the mightiest foe. So let's see what we can get out of the basic humans in a game of 40k. Now the infantry squad is a 10-man troops unit that will cost you 40 points to field on the battlefield. It consists of 1 sergeant and 9 infantrymen. The sergeant has a las pistol and chainsword, and the rest have lasguns. They have the basic guardsman profile with movement 6, weapons skill and ballistic skill 4 up, strength and toughness 3, 1 wound, 1 attack, leadership 6 and a 5 up save, and the sergeant is the same except he has an extra attack and pip of leadership, meaning the squad has actually a reasonable leadership characteristic of 7 overall. As well as their base equipment, they're also equipped with frag grenades. The lasgun is a rapid fire strength 3 AP nothing weapon, so really only that great at taking out light infantry. Even with masses of them, they're only going to do chip damage to vehicles or heavy infantry. It's one of the most flexible squads in the book, and it has quite a lot of options. You can take a Vox caster for 5 points. This will let your officers order them even if they're not within 6 inches, provided they're still within 18 inches, and the officer is by a Vox caster himself. Personally, I don't really like the Vox caster that much. To my mind, you're probably just better to buy more company commanders, and just have a lot more orders on the tabletop in the first place. The sergeant can replace his chainsword with a power sword, which I typically wouldn't bother doing as is only strength 3, and he can take a weapon from the ranged weapons list, which is literally just a bolt gun, bolt pistol and plasma pistol. The bolt gun and the bolt pistol both cost 1 point each, so I personally would take the bolt gun every single time, replacing that 1 strength 3 shot for possibly 2 strength 4 shots, or one with a much longer range, is generally always going to be worth that 1 point. I think it's one of the best value upgrades that you can take in the Codex, as it lets your sergeant actually contribute to the squad's firepower, and you'll be surprised just how often that bolter will do something crucial. I wouldn't ever bother with the bolt pistol, it's scarcely any better than the las pistol, but the plasma pistol can be an interesting option, particularly if you have some way that the squad's more likely to get close to the enemy. Having an extra high power strength 8 shot in there isn't too bad. It'll set you back 5 points. The only slight downside is that it has the unpleasant possibility of sniping the squad's sergeant with his extra leadership and attack, which isn't ideal. I'd personally advise just keep them cheap, use the bolt gun, or just use las pistol and chainsword if you have that modelled already. One guardsman can take a weapon from the special weapons list, namely the sniper rifle, flamer, grenade launcher, melter gun and plasma gun. The sniper rifle for just 2 points isn't too bad for a backfield camping infantry squad. Basically something that you're not going to be thinking about moving every turn, because you're not really going to be getting enough value out of it unless you do sit still. The grenade launcher, on the other hand, for 3 points, has both a frag and crack mode. The frag mode can just synergize a little bit with the lasguns shots of the rest of the squad, or can help chip away at tanks a tiny bit on crack mode. I feel like the grenade launcher is fairly well balanced compared with just taking the points and investing in more guardsmen. I personally prefer to just invest in more guardsmen myself, and put any other points towards more heavy guns at the back on the tanks. It is quite handy for being able to remain effective on the move, however, so could be reasonable on an advancing infantry squad. The flamer's just 6 points, so a bit cheaper than the initial points cost it came out with in the Codex. I'm not really a big fan of the flamer on guard squads, I'm afraid. By the time that you've got into flamer range, you'll also be in first rank, second rank fire range. And to be honest, I would rather invest in more lasgun bodies at that time, which as well as dealing more damage with those lasgun shots, also will be tougher for the opponent to remove. To some extent they can help with Overwatch, but I'm afraid it's just not really quite enough to sell it for me. The plasma gun, on the other hand, I am a big fan of. Back at the start of 8th edition, my plasma gun and bolter infantry squads did pretty well. The plasma gun really upping the ante against more heavily armoured targets such as space marines and being able to chip away with those overcharged blasts against enemy vehicles. In terms of points per damage caused, the plasma gun is generally going to far outperform any of the other options point for point, but obviously it does come with the risk of overheating and killing your special weapon holder if and when you roll a 1. I still think that the benefits outweigh the risks, however, so I would certainly consider a plasma gun on an advancing infantry squad if I wasn't just planning on keeping them cheap and using them for screening. Finally, we have the melter gun, which will be 10 points for your standard melter gun shot, strength 8, AP -4, 12 inches, and if you're within 6 inches then roll 2d6 and pick the highest. I'm afraid I'm not the biggest fan of melter guns on infantry squads, just because there's a very real chance they're never going to make it into that 12-inch range of a heavy hitter, and that pricey 10-point investment will be wasted. For the price of a melter gun, you can now buy a missile launcher, which is guaranteed to be taking shots from turn 1. I'm afraid I still think that the plasma gun eclipses the melter gun by being stronger against the vast majority of targets, and letting you at least contribute some firepower when you're greater than 12 inches away. So overall, for me, I'd either take the plasma gun, if I wanted to deal some damage with the squad, possibly take the grenade launcher on an advancing squad, or the sniper rifle on a backfield squad as a cheap upgrade, or just keep the squad completely bare bones, aside from the bolter on the sergeant, which I would take every time. Finally, we come on to heavy weapons, where you organise 2 of the guardsmen within the squad into a heavy weapon team, which has 2 wounds, and also has a lasgun. The heavy weapon team can have one of the standard heavy weapons available to the guard squads, the mortar, autocannon, missile launcher, heavy bolter, or lascannon. Bear in mind that they are a ballistic skill 4 platform, so you're not going to get quite as much out of them compared with if you're putting them on more elite units, but the 10-body infantry squad should do a reasonable job of keeping the heavy weapon fairly safe. I would certainly consider one on a backfield camping infantry squad, one that isn't going to be expecting to move all game, because you're only going to get a reasonable return on your investment if they are sitting still. The heavy bolter, I'm afraid I find a bit underwhelming on infantry squads. It's not really doing all that much different to what the lasguns will do for you, as it's not amazing at punching through heavy armour. I'd rather keep the squad cheap and give them the option to move than take the heavy bolter in most circumstances. The mortar has seen a very sad increase up to 9 points now. I certainly no longer think it's amazing on a heavy weapon mortar team, but it may still limp into being okay on a backfield camping infantry squad. The reason being that you're paying 9 points to have that squad actually contribute something towards the game rather than absolutely nothing, say if they were cowering on a objective out of line of sight at the back of your army. 9 points for d6 bolter shots each turn for several turns isn't really all that bad a deal, so I would still consider mortar teams on infantry squads despite the price rise as a cheap source of indirect fire. Then we have the autocannon, missile launcher and lascannon, all of which are solid options for dealing with some heavier targets. The autocannon and missile launcher are now 10 points each, and the lascannon is only 15. These are decent reductions on what they came out in the original Codex, and I think they're all very palatable on taking on a backfield infantry squad. Autocannons will do you better against light vehicles such as toughness 6 targets, particularly if they don't have high armour saves, and missile launchers and lascannons will both do you quite well against tanks. The lascannon will do better, but that's why it costs 5 points more. I think that any of these are pretty viable, but I would only take it on the squads at the back of the board that are claiming your home objectives, rather than taking it on literally every squad, as even with a heavy weapon, infantry squads aren't usually the best source of damage dealing. That usually tends to be the tanks and other heavy hitters in the guard codex. So that's all the options on the datasheet. For my mind, the way that you want to equip the infantry squad depends on the role you want to use them in. For advancing squads to bully the midfield and seize objectives, either consider them bare bones, that would usually include at least a bolter, but you could consider grenade launchers and plasma guns as well, or maybe even a plasma pistol on the sergeant. For a backfield camping infantry squad, again you can equip them bare bones, it's perfectly viable to keep them cheap, but you can take one of the cheap guard heavy weapons. I think that the mortar, lascannon, missile launcher and autocannon are all perfectly viable, depending on the type of firepower that you need. I'd also strongly consider upgrading one guy to a sniper rifle for the 2 extra points on a backfield infantry squad, just for the extra range so they can actually contribute to the fight a bit more. And you never know, occasionally they do achieve some surprising things, like the sniper in my squad that did the mortal wound that was the deciding factor on whether I killed a demon prince or not in the following turn. Now we talked about every gun but the lasgun, and lasguns are very important. With first rank fire, second rank fire, I'd say the most efficient way of actually doing damage with the infantry squad is to have them unload those 36 las shots into some infantry, and watch the opponent at least fail some saves for each volley that you manage. That's one of the reasons I often do just run the squads bare bones and just focus on getting the most out of those nice last guns with first rank, second rank, and not worry too much about shiny war gear. So now we've talked about the squad a bit, let's take a look at a few of the ways that we can make them stronger and get the most out of them. So first let's talk about regiments. As the backbone of the guard, most regiments are strong. Cadian's usually best on backfield infantry squads, plinking away with their heavy weapons, potentially getting the order to twin link their heavy weapons from a nearby officer. Catachans are a known and feared regiment for advancing into the enemy lines. With Strachan plus a priest, you can be getting 3 attacks per strength 4 guardsman per turn, posing a genuinely scary threat for the numbers that you can take them in. Their +1 leadership when they're near officers is also a big help, and prevents the squad from being wiped by leadership quite as easily. I'd say Valhallan are probably the top defensive infantry squad choice just because they are so resistant to leadership, as taking casualties and failing morale is a genuine source of easy damage to multiple infantry squads. Valhallans halving the amount of casualties taken from leadership is a genuinely great factor in keeping more guard bodies on the table, and their unique relic Petrov's Mark 45 can only cement this further. Vostroyans again aren't such a bad choice for an infantry squad. That +6-inch range will be incredibly handy for las guns and plasma guns and heavy weapons, and it allows them to be a lot more of an effective fighting force on the table, being able to just engage units that they otherwise might not have reached. Armageddon are also helpful as well. 18-inch rapid fire again is great with las guns and plasma guns, meaning that an advancing wave of them will have a decent amount more damage output over the course of the game. Talon are another solid choice. Being able to advance and still shoot means that you get the best of both worlds of being able to move fast and also keep up decent firepower. They were the regiment I first started playing when I picked up 8th, and being able to spread out, cover the entire table while also mowing down infantry is certainly powerful. Being able to outflank a bunch of infantry can also be very disruptive to the enemy's plans. Finally, the Mordian Iron Guard also have a benefit to morale which is helpful, and Overwatch on a 5-up, which can make an advancing gun line of them a bit more of a thorny prospect to charge, but it's a bit more situational than the others because not every army is going to be charging headlong at you, and often las guns aren't going to do all that much to certain targets, say if you're playing a mostly high armoured army, such as Imperial Knights. Overall, I think it's typically going to be better to pick your regiment based on the other units that you're using in the force aside from your infantry. In terms of the infantry squads being strong on their own, Cadian I'd say is probably best for a shooty force. Between those reroll ones, their order for twin linking and overlapping fields, they can actually turn infantry squads into a decent ranged threat. But I'd say Catachan are probably the single strongest choice for an infantry squad heavy army. They can just seize control of the centre of the board, keep up some decent las fire, and also kick the living daylights out of any enemy infantry. Unfortunate enough to get in their path, there is a reason that a lot of people seem to run Catachan infantry squads as part of a competitive list in big tournaments. Let's talk about character buffs now, and being guard, the most important one is orders. Company and platoon commanders can really soup up your infantry squads and allow them to achieve pretty spectacular things on the table. I'll be covering orders at some point in its own video on its own, but in terms of the infantry squads, move 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 is one of the best orders you can possibly give to an advancing infantry squad. It can make your guardsmen run faster than jet bikes, which I know is a bit ludicrous and I've been saying it all 8th edition, but this insane movement can get you to move potentially up to 24 inches a turn, so this will make securing objectives, which is what these guys do best, very very easy, and you can also use it en masse to move your infantry up into the midfield turn 1, and this is great for move blocking the enemy army. It's very satisfying to use one squad of lasgun armed infantry squads to set up just in front of a knight and prevent that knight from moving forwards that turn, just because some blokes with lasguns are in the way. Whenever you have the option to do an order, you need to think, is the few lasgun shots that you're going to get by not using move 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 really going to help more than having optimal positioning with that guard unit? I think it is an underestimated order by some commanders, and from a competitive view, one of the strongest ones. The next one I really like is first rank, second rank fire, for obvious reasons, and it's a very good reason to keep the squad bare bones with just lasguns, as if you're going to double the amount of lasgun fire out of a squad, it means that very cheap investment can get very nasty, due to the amounts of strength 3 shots it can put out. Obviously if you don't need the extra mobility for move move move, then this is another great option. The one that you have to weigh it up against though is take aim to reroll those hit rolls of 1. You need to weigh up whether or not rerolling 1s on all weapons, including your heavy and special weapons, is going to be more valuable than double firing all of those lasguns. They're both powerful buffs, but even doubling all your lasgun fire might not be as useful as rerolling ones on a las cannon and plasma gun to try and take down a hard target. Take aim is often going to be the go-to order for a backfield infantry squad, particularly if you're Acadian and get to reroll all hits altogether if you stay still. Bring it down, rerolling all ones to wounds will be mathematically the same as take aim, so it really doesn't matter too much which one you use. The only reason to use one over the other is if you already have a source of reroll ones to hit or reroll ones to wound, such as being near Sergeant Harker or Commissar Yarrick for example, or if you use one of the options to combine multiple orders on one unit. Forwards for the Emperor is a bit of a halfway house between move and first rank, second rank. It lets you advance and still shoot, so it's good when you need a little bit of extra mobility over your standard 6 inches and you still want to maintain some firepower. Get back in the fight is great for shooting after you've fallen back from close combat, which is often something an infantry squad will be trying to do if the enemy piles into it. This one's fairly straightforward, and it can be very frustrating for your opponents when you're playing against them, because you can't stop the infantry squad's firepower even if they're in combat that turn. Finally, fixed bayonets is to allow a squad in close combat to fight an additional time. This is good if you don't want to fall back from an opponent, because you need to keep them locked up for whatever reason, and it could be particularly powerful if you're Katachan infantry with 3 attacks from a priest and Strachan nearby. You could get a whole load of attacks out of that infantry squad. The regimental specific orders are also worth considering, though we'll talk about these a bit more when I do a video on the various regiments. Probably Mordians is the strongest in my opinion to allow you to target a character. With their rapid fire weapons, even if they're not the closest unit, could be particularly good to get some plasma shots on a pesky character loitering near your lines. Aside from orders, there are plenty of other characters that can benefit guardsmen, as they are pretty much the core unit in the book. Commissars can help with leadership issues. I could perfectly see a cheap commissar or a lord commissar managing to earn his points back by keeping some guardsmen around, while also providing you with a cheap character that can also chip in with damage output. Commissar Yarrick could help out a big blob of infantry, giving them all rerolls to hit in both shooting and close combat, though he is a bit pricey. Astropaths can allow infantry squads to ignore cover on a key target, and either they or Primaris Psychers could either make the infantry squad -1 to hit, or buff its saves with Night Shroud and Psychic Barrier. This will be best used on a combined infantry squad when you use the stratagem to put 2 squads together, so the buff will go further. Another morale boosting option is the Command Squad's Platoon Standard. It's an interesting option, but not really one I've ever chosen to use myself, as it's quite easy to just shoot it out, and you could just buy more infantry with the same points. We've already said that priests can give them extra attacks, I'd argue usually best in Katachan due to them being strength 4 and actually being able to wound something half decently. And there are various regimental characters, such as Sergeant Harker, which can give a whole load of infantry squads nearby reroll ones in the shooting phase. Infantry squads have their own Vigilist detachment, from Vigilist Defiant, the Emperor's Conclave Infantry Company, which is sort of a religious kind of infantry company with priests leading them. This can give them some situational benefits to their close combat abilities. We'll go over it a bit closer in another video hopefully. I'm a bit take it or leave it personally. It'll probably be most used in a Katachan army as they're half decent in melee. Some warlord traits and relics can help out your infantry squads. Old Grudges is always great for rerolls against a certain target. Draconian Discipline can help keep your squads in line, because every time they fail a morale test, one of them gets blammed and then they pass it, provided the warlord is a commissar of course, and Bellowing Voice or Master of Command could help out with orders. In terms of relics, you could outflank an infantry squad with an officer with the Dagger of Tusark, get some more orders with the Laurels of Command, get some mad rerolls against Chaos with the Relic of Lost Cadia, and have some immunity against morale with the Iron Star of Mordian. Again, we'll look at warlord traits and relics in a future video in a bit more detail. Stratagems next then. Infantry squads might be a good recipient of the Inspired Tactics order to allow an officer to issue another order per turn, say if they had another infantry squad that absolutely needed one within 6 inches. Take Cover for 1 command point is a really good value little defensive buff, giving a +1 to the infantry squad's save. Could be absolutely great when they're doing their best role, which is hunkering down in cover on an objective, because who doesn't like armor 3 up infantry squads when you've taken into account both this and cover. That combo can be quite good as well if you've also got an Astropath with Psychic Barrier for anything up to a 2-up save infantry squad. You could use Grenadiers for 1 command point so everyone can throw a frag grenade. Could be handy, but you will achieve more with first rank, second rank fire, provided you can get an order to them. Fight for the Death is a little cheeky leadership shenanigan. When you decide that you absolutely need a squad to survive a morale test, you can use this stratagem and roll a d3 rather than a d6, which means that you can often calculate that at least one squad member will survive after morale, which is often all you need to prevent your opponent scoring a Maelstrom card, or to hold an objective, or to prevent them getting an important unit kill. So it gives you another option rather than just the 2 command points auto-pass stratagem from the main codex. Consolidate squads is our way of combining 2 infantry squads to make a big 20-man squad. It costs 1 command point, and it means that the squad's very big, which is great for any 1 unit buffs, such as making efficient use of orders, psychic buffs, or stratagems. You can do this multiple times, meaning that you could get an absolutely monstrous squad over the course of the game, but you can only do it once per turn, so you're getting a maximum of 30 by turn 3 and 40 by turn 4, for example, and that's presuming you take absolutely no casualties. I've had some good success in combining this with Vengeance for Cadia, where you put 2 squads together, tell them to first rank, second rank, giving you 80 lasgun shots, and then reroll all hits and wounds against your targets, and believe me, even with strength 3 weapons, it's really going to allow you to stack some saves on your targets. We've already mentioned overlapping fields for Cadia. Vostroyon's Firstborn Pride is great for +1 ballistic skill, but is often better used on a bigger, more lethal unit. But Talon's ambush stratagem for outflanking a bunch of infantry squads is potentially quite powerful for trying to seize control of some objectives on your opponent's side of the board. Another recently updated addition to the Imperial army are Inquisitors. These pair quite well with infantry squads as well, as they can use their leadership, and they can buff them with psychic spells to give them 5-up imballs or auto-pass morale or similar abilities. Again, probably a topic for another video. I'm starting to realise I've got my work cut out with this guard codex. In terms of their in-game use, we've already talked about the various ways a bit in which you can make infantry squads useful. As well as having battlefield roles, infantry squads are important for filling battalions and getting you those all-important command points, which is why they're often fielded just bare bones with 3 infantry squads and 2 company commanders, making a cheap Loyal 32 battalion to farm out 5 command points. Now Tempestus Scions went down in points cost, they do actually do this cheaper, but they are less durable and have less firepower than the infantry squad. So there are decent advantages to still taking the infantry squads. In-game, in most of my guard armies, I'll typically start with a big infantry squad screen, out in front of my army trying to rush those midfield objectives with move, or move blocking some enemy heavy hitters, as we'd already mentioned. On first turn, they'll be trying to get as much cover as they can take, and set up alongside whichever support characters we need, particularly making sure that they're in order range for officers. We can fan them out a bit if we're trying to screen out enemy deep strike units, or maybe keep them a little bit more clustered up, potentially even hiding out of line of sight if that's not that much of a threat. In some games, particularly kill point games, it might well just be worth keeping them towards the back of your army to score objectives, as they are squads that are quite easily eliminated, and you don't just want to be throwing away free kill points if you know that the enemy are just going to mow them all down for little return. More typically though, I like to have quite a large number of infantry on the battlefield. I'll usually try and field 3 full battalions of guard if I'm not running any allies. This means I'll typically have 90 infantry on the table at least, and I'll usually increase that to anywhere up to 120 or 150. Most of them will be going forwards, either bare bones or maybe equipped with plasma guns, and maybe 3 or 4 squads will be equipped to sit on home objectives, probably with some heavy weapons and maybe sniper rifles if I'm feeling generous. From there, the advancing wave will move forward, being ordered by their officers, usually to either use first rank, second rank, or move as is appropriate for the opponent that I'm facing. We'll really be looking for any opportunities to disrupt or distract the enemy army, particularly any gamey charges that we can make from out of line of sight to tie up enemy firepower, which will be often a lot easier to reach than you think it might be, when you can move 18 inches or so on the first turn with move. Even a lone guardsman can be the hero that stops an entire battle tank from firing in the right circumstances. As the initial screen gets depleted or destroyed, it might become more necessary to move up even some of the backfield squads with the heavy weapons to become a new screen, or to charge towards objectives with move. So you'd have to weigh up the benefits of keeping that heavy weapon firing, or having more bodies on the line. A clever opponent will often be able to inflict quite decent morale casualties on your models by removing 6 or 7 infantry out of a squad per turn, pretty much guaranteeing that you're going to fail a morale test and take some casualties. Sometimes this is inevitable. I'd be quite mean with your command points and only auto-pass or use the D3 leadership stratagem when it's absolutely necessary, and accept that a lot of 4-point guardsmen are going to be getting packed away back into their box, no matter what happens this game. Obviously you can defend with that a little bit, either from the faction-specific leadership buffs or with commissars or regimental standards. Now at the start of 8th edition, infantry squads with plasma guns and bolters, with orders and some decent support, could pretty much take on whatever unit they wanted in 40k. They had decent damage output and were really quite durable point for point, and they haven't really changed that much throughout all of the edition. What has changed is that all of the other armies have grown up to have their own powerful abilities. In particular, anti-horde weapons have got a lot more cheap and a lot more prevalent over the edition, meaning that it's now very easy to remove a whole load of infantry squads for very little investment. Space Marine Assault Centurions are an example of this. You can now pack a Hurricane Bolter onto a model for just 50 points, and every Hurricane Bolter that fires is likely to take down half an infantry squad. At the start of 8th I was running full infantry armies and it was quite effective, but now I think that infantry are better employed as a screen, maybe with a few plasma guns and special weapons thrown in here and there, but mainly leave the damage dealing and power of the Imperial Guard to the tanks, particularly the Lehman Russes and artillery. They are absolutely still an essential part of the army, from filling out battalions, scoring objectives and murdering light infantry, but I wouldn't say that they're the core damage dealers anymore. In terms of competitors, for their troop slots, they only really have conscripts and scions to compete with. Conscripts have received multiple nerfs, they're now 4-point guardsmen with worse leadership, no options and worse ability to take orders, and their only real advantage is being able to start in a really big squad. Now I still think conscripts can be used, but they only have niche applications now, so for the most part I'd rather take infantry squads over them. As for scions, I think they do quite different things. Scions are fairly pricey even with the new points drop, and they need to get close to deal any damage output at all, so they're not really anywhere near as much of a main screening battle line unit as the infantry squad. What they are great for though is dropping onto objectives, disrupting and distracting the enemy army, and maybe applying some focused firepower with a drop of plasma scions or something like that. So I don't really think that the two units compete that much, they just serve quite different roles. The difference is that I think that you could pretty much take almost as many infantry squads as you want in a list, where I think that scions tend to drop off in utility the more that you take of them, so the first few squads that you take are a lot more valuable than say the 5th or 6th squad. So overall, I still really like the Guard Infantry Squad. It is very much one of the best troops units in all of 40k, between crazy movement, decent firepower, particularly anti-infantry, dirt cheap battalion filling, and great durability. I'm really glad that 8th made them so much more viable than they were in 7th. It's certainly a much better time to be playing Imperial Guard. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If I've missed any cool tactics or good applications for infantry squads, I'd be keen to hear them, or any recent successes your infantry have had on the battlefield. I'll be continuing with the Guard series with one video every 2 days, so feel free to check back in a couple of days' time for another upload, and subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you don't want to miss it. I also have a Patreon page which you're welcome to support if you'd like to help out the channel, as making these videos does take a decent amount of time and effort. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.